Alright guys, so today we're going to be creating a fun pet shop flyer design using some freebies from this month's bundle. So let's fire up Photoshop and create our new file here. And the first thing I want to do is just put in a name. So I'm just going to call this Pet Shop Flyer Design. And then we can go ahead and change the units of measurement from pixels to inches and change the width from 2 to 5 and the height from 1.72 to 7 inches. Also make sure that your resolution is set to 300 pixels per inch, RGB, and change the background contents here to black if it's not already set to this color. Now we can go ahead and hit create and we'll have our new document. So the first thing I want to do is open up my first freebie texture by coming in here to the Unember Roller Inker files, and I'm just going to open 16 halftone s.png. Alright, here it is. So I'm going to move this to the side and just hold down Command and Shift and drag this over into my document. But as soon as I do that, you'll see that I can't really see anything, but that's because our background is black. So if I just turn that off for a second, now you can see the texture. So let's go ahead and hold down the Control key and click on the layer, and we're going to choose Convert to Smart Object. Now double click where it says Layer 1, and we're just going to rename this layer to 16 halftone S, and double click on the layer. Now this is going to bring up our layer styles, and this is where we want to check off this box here that says color overlay. Now we can come down here and we want to leave the blending mode set to normal, but we're going to change the color. So for this color, let's go ahead and use the hexadecimal value 175B55 and hit OK. Alright, so here's our first texture. Now from here what we want to do is open our next halftone texture from the Unember pack. Alright, and this is halftone 13 halftone S. So let's do the same thing. We're going to click and drag this over into our file. Convert the layer to a smart object by holding Control, clicking on the layer, and choosing Convert to Smart Object. And then we can rename this one as well to 13 halftone S. Alright, and from here what we want to do is actually apply a free transform. Now you can see this texture is quite a bit larger than our document, so what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift and the Alt Option keys together, scale it down a bit, and then move my cursor over the corner here, and you can see how it turns into this curved arrow. So while I have my cursor here, I'll hold down the Shift key and just rotate this a couple times until the texture is right side up. Then I can just place it up top here, and maybe scale it down a little bit more just so we can get it to about the same width as our document. And then I'll press Return or Enter to apply the changes. Now I'm going to double click on this layer, again to bring up the layer styles. Check off the color overlay, but this time we're going to change the color to something else. We're going to use the hexadecimal value FFDC2D, which is kind of a brighter yellow color, and then go ahead and apply those changes. Okay, so you should now have your black background, your 16 halftone S layer, and your 13 halftone S layer on top. And we've made both of these layers smart objects with a layer style applied. So I'm going to select this 13 halftone S layer, come down here to my adjustment layer icon, and we're going to choose a hue saturation adjustment layer. Now what we want to do here is check off this box that says colorize, and we're going to change the hue to 38. And let's go ahead and change the saturation to about 19. Now what's nice about adding a hue saturation adjustment layer like this is that all we have to do is turn it on and off. We're not actually changing anything about our textures below this layer. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is double click on our background layer, and we can now just add a name, but this is going to allow us to unlock this layer so that we can manipulate it or move it around or anything like that. So for now I'm just going to call it background, and then I'm going to return to the freebies folder, and this time I'm going to open my hand-drawn line pattern, lines pattern 03, and open that up in Photoshop. Alright, now I'm going to drag this over into my new document just like I did before, and we want to move this above all the other layers. So I'm just going to click and drag to place that layer on top. Hold down Control and click on the layer to once again convert it to a smart object. And now I will rename this layer Lines Pattern 03. Alright, and again, press Command plus T on the keyboard, and then hold down Alt, Option, and Shift and just scale this down a bit. Now we don't want to scale it down too small because you'll see that we actually need it to be the same height as our document. So make it about the same height, and then you can just kind of move it over a little bit into a position that you like. Now this is actually going to help us here because what we want to do is use this kind of as a mask for all of our textures below. So what I'm going to do is select my hue saturation adjustment layer, hold the Shift key, and then click on the background layer. So I've got these 4 layers selected, and then I'll press Command and G on the keyboard. Now I can double click and rename this group folder to Textures. And now what I'm going to do is select my Lines Pattern Smart Object layer, and I'm going to hold down the Command key. And when I do that, you'll see that my cursor changes into this box here. So that's just indicating that I can click and it's going to activate a selection around this shape. So once I've done that, I can turn off the visibility for this layer, click on my Textures group folder, and now just apply a layer mask. Okay, so once I've done that, you guys can see what's happening. It's using those lines as a mask so that the only places we're seeing the texture are where our black lines are. Now the only problem is that I want the black background to be outside of this folder. So let me just open the Textures folder, and I'm just going to click and drag this background layer down until it's outside of the folder, and now you can see that it's filled with black behind our texture. Okay, so at this point I can actually get rid of my line patterns because we only needed it for our mask. So what we're going to do from here is try to find the center of our image, and a way that I like to do that is to add a new layer, and then I'll use my guide. So let me just press D on the keyboard to get my default colors, and then press Alt, Option, and Delete to fill my new layer with black. Now what I can do is press Command T on the keyboard to apply free transform, but when I do that, you'll see that I have these handles here, and it's showing me exactly where the center of my image is. So I'm going to use my rulers. If you guys don't see these in Photoshop, you can get them by pressing Command R, or by coming up to View and checking off rulers. Okay, so all we're going to do is drag a guide down here to find the horizontal center, and then drag a guide into the vertical center as well. And if you don't see these, you can just press Command and the semicolon, and that will bring up your guides. Okay, so now that we've found the center of our image, we can delete that layer. But we're going to go ahead and create another new layer that will serve as our vignette. Okay, so now that we know where the center of the layer is, we've added a new layer. So let's go ahead and double click this layer and just rename it Vignette, and then press G on the keyboard to get your gradient tool. Now you'll notice up here in the top toolbar that you've got your gradient settings. So click inside here and just make sure that your gradient looks like this. Now all I've got is a solid black color on one side. You'll see that the box on the bottom is our color, and the box above it controls the opacity. So I've got a black fill at 100%, and on the right we still have a black fill color, but the opacity is set to 0. So it should be fading from solid black to 0% black. Go ahead and hit OK, and then make sure that you have your radial gradient selected, which is the second icon in this row, and also make sure to check off this box here that says reverse. Now once you've done that, you can click in the center of your image using the guides, and then just click and drag outwards a little bit off of the canvas here. And then release your cursor, and you should now have a gradient fill. So I'm going to turn the guides off now, and then I'll change the blending mode of this layer set to multiply, and reduce the opacity to about 80% just by pressing the number 8 on the keyboard. So now that you've applied the vignette, you can turn the layer on and off and kind of see that it adds a bit of a dramatic effect. And this is nice because it kind of draws your attention towards the center of the image. So from here what we can do is come back to our adjustment layer icon on the bottom of the layers panel, and now we're going to add a solid color adjustment layer. Now we don't want black, so for this what I'm going to use is a nice kind of orange color, and the hexadecimal value that I'm using for that is EFA161, and then go ahead and press OK. Now let's change the blending mode of this layer from normal to screen, and you should now have something like this. Alright, so select your top color fill adjustment layer, hold the Shift key and click on the background, and then press Command G to put it into a group folder and rename this folder to background. So we now have our background with our textures, our vignette, and our color overlay. So from here what we can look at is adding our center container image. So I'm going to return to the freebie folder and add a shape here. Okay, so I'm going to open shape 15 and just drag this into the document here. And the first thing I'm going to do is rename this layer shape 15, hold the control key and click on it and convert it to a smart object. What we want to do here is double click on the layer to again bring up our layer styles, and we're going to check off the color overlay option once again. But this time let's go ahead and change the color to something else. Let's try F0E 6BB and hit OK, and you should now have this kind of off-white cream color. Alright, so what I want to do next is press Command T to apply a free transform, and then hold Alt Option and Shift and drag this inwards. Now the reason again why I'm holding Alt Option and Shift is because you can scale it from the center. If I were to let go of the Alt Option key, I would only be able to scale it from this one corner. And that's fine, but I kind of like doing it this way because it creates an equal amount of space on all sides. Alright, so let's make it a little bit smaller, and then once you're happy with the size and placement of the object, go ahead and press Return to apply the changes. Alright, so now I want to create another shape inside of this shape. So the way that I'm going to do that is to hold the Command key and click on the layer thumbnail icon, then come up to the Select menu and choose Modify Contract. Now I want to contract the selection by 10 pixels and then hit Enter. And you'll see that we now have brought our selection in. So what I can do from here is add a new layer in the bottom of the layers palette, and then press Alt, Option, and Delete, and that's just going to fill this selection with my foreground color, which is currently set to black. Alright, so now I can press Command D to deselect the shape, or you can just come up to the Select menu and choose Deselect. And what I want to do from here is double click on this layer and apply a color overlay with a different color fill. Alright, so for this, I'm going to try 60BC98, which is this nice kind of seafoam green color. Hit OK a few times to apply the changes, and then rename this layer to Shape 15 Copy. What I'm going to do now is just select both of these objects together, press Command G to put them into a group folder of their own, and we'll call this Container, because this is going to serve as a container for all of our text and information. So now that we have our container here, we can begin adding our type. So go ahead and create a new layer above the container layer, press T on the keyboard, and then click in here, and we're just going to add our text that says best friend. And we can't really see it right now, so I'm just going to grab my selection tool and move it over here. Now I want to change this font to something else, so I'm just going to select my text tool again, and maybe click 2 or 3 times in here to select this type. Now I'll open my character panel, which is this small A over here on the right. And if you guys don't see this, you can also access it by coming up to the window menu and choosing character. I'm going to change this to a font called Knockout, but if you guys don't have this font, you can also use a font that is similar, like Helvetica Neue or Franchise or any other kind of bold condensed typeface. Alright, now for the size, I'm going to make it around 60 point or 60.15. And then I'm going to adjust the kerning, or the spacing between the letters, to 25, just to add a little bit of space there. And then when I'm ready to deselect this, I'm just going to come up here and grab my Move tool. Now I'm going to place this text roughly in the center of my container, and then double click on the layer to bring up my layer styles. Okay, for this, I'm going to check off Color Overlay, and I actually want to use that same kind of cream color that I used for my Shape 15, the main container shape. So that was F0E 6BB, and then I will hit Enter. But before we close out of this, we also want to check off the Drop Shadow option. Okay, so for our settings here for the Drop Shadow, I'm going to leave it set to black, and we're going to change the opacity to about 15% because we don't want it to be too heavy. For the angle, let's go ahead and make it 130. Change the distance to 20, the spread to 22, and you can leave the size set to 0. And then I'm going to hit OK. So you should now have something like this. And if you need to adjust, the placement of your text, you can do that anytime. Okay, and you'll also notice over here where our layers palette is that you can see both the color overlay and the drop shadow, which you can turn on and off just by poking out these eyeballs here. So let's go ahead and add another text layer. So create a new layer, grab your text tool again, and then click above your best friend text, And this time we're going to add some type that says take home. Okay, again, grab your move tool to place this back in the center here. Click inside of your text 2 or 3 times to highlight it. And this time I'm going to change my typeface to Rockwell Bold. Again, if you guys don't have this typeface, which I think most computers come with this font, you can use something similar. Any kind of slab serif like Memphis or National will do. Okay, but what we're going to do now is click inside of this, and we're going to change the size to about 15 point because we want it to be quite a bit smaller than our best friend text. And I'm also going to change the kerning right here and set it to around 445 so that it's nice and spread out. Okay, then I'll just move it over here, click in between these 2 words, and tap the space bar maybe 1 or 2 times just to separate these words a bit. From here, I'll double click on the layer to bring up my layer styles once again, and click Color Overlay. Now, as soon as I do that, it's probably remembering the same settings that we used from before, so we don't have to actually change this color here because it's remembering the color that we just used before. So go ahead and hit OK, and now we'll add another text layer. So go ahead and create a new layer, and now I'm going to click below the best friend copy, and I'm just going to type out Saturday, July 8th, 2017. Grab your move tool and just drag this text back over here so you can see it. And now press T on the keyboard, click inside to highlight all of your text, and I'm going to change my typeface to Gotham Medium. Now this is another typeface that can be easily substituted with any nice clean sans serif font. So if you guys don't have this font, you can try something else, maybe like Century Gothic or something similar that will work. But I'm going to click inside here, and I'm going to change a couple of these settings here for this type as well. So I'm going to change it to 9 point, and then for the kerning, I'm going to change this to 345. And I'll grab my move tool and just center this over here beneath our text. Now again, I can just double click on this layer to bring up my layer styles and check off Color Overlay to apply the same color that we used for our previous text layers. But another way to do this is to actually move your cursor over the small FX icon that appears here on the layer. And all you have to do is hold down the Alt-Option key, click, and then drag that little FX icon onto your text, and you will have the exact same settings that you used applied to both instances of this text. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add another text layer just above our best friend text. And this time I'm going to type out the words acute, press Command A to select all, and now I'm going to change the typeface to Sign Painter. Now I believe this is also a free font which you guys can try out, but any kind of nice script typeface will do in here. Okay, so all I'm doing is moving my cursor between the letters here, using the left and right arrows to either increase or decrease the spacing between the letters. So that way I can just kind of manually set the type here. And I'm going to change the size to 28.88, and you can set the kerning to about 5. Okay, now we want to apply the same color overlay layer style that we used on our previous text. So if you remember, the way to do that again is either by double clicking and checking off the color overlay box, or by holding Alt-Option and just dragging that FX icon onto your text. So what I'm going to do now is press V to get my move tool, zoom in a little bit by pressing Command and the plus key, and then I can press Command T to apply a free transform, hold the Control key, and click on your text, and now we're going to choose the option here that says Skew. So check that off, and then as I hover my cursor towards the right side of this text, you'll see that I have an up and down arrow. So I can now move this arrow upwards to skew my text, and then once I'm happy with it, just press Return on the keyboard. So before we continue, let's just space out our text a little bit. Grab the Take Home text layer, hold the Shift key and tap it up a few times, and then select our Cute text layer and just move that up as well. Now what I want to do is center all of these together, so I'm just going to select all of these text layers while holding the Shift key, come up to the top here and choose this option that says Align Horizontal Centers. And that's just going to make sure that everything is nice and centered. Okay, so now that we've got most of our text in here, we can begin adding some decorations or other elements to it. So I'll return to my freebies folder here, and I'm going to come into my vintage logo kit and open up this vintage logo object, which looks like a paw. This one is a little bit different. I'm not actually going to be able to click and drag this layer because it's locked. So what you can do in that case is press Command A to select all, Command C to copy it, And then I'll just come back over here to my design and press Command V to paste it. Double click to rename this layer, and I'll call it Vintage Logo Object 0162. Press Enter. And then let's go ahead and convert this to a smart object by pressing Ctrl and clicking on the layer and choosing Convert Smart Object. And then we'll scale it down. So press Command T and then Command 0 so that you can see the whole object in your document space here. And now I can press Alt, Option, and Shift and just scale this paw way down so that we can place it in the middle of our take-home text. Alright, press Enter to apply the changes, press V to get your Move tool, and let's just place it in between these two words. So zoom in a bit if you have to, and then you can also, mess with it a little bit more until you're happy with the size and placement. And now let's go ahead and hold down the Alt Option key, select this Saturday, July 8th text layer, and then click and drag the effects icon onto the paw so that it has the same layer style applied. Just going to make it a little bit smaller. So I'll return to my freebies here. I'm going to select a border from the decoration toolkit. We'll be using short border 11. Now I'm going to click and drag the short border into my file, hold down the Control key and click to convert it to a smart object, and then I'll just rename this layer short border 11. Now the next thing I want to do is apply the same color overlay, so I'm just going to click and drag the effects icon, then press Command T to resize this a bit. And let's just place this below our best friend text in between that and the Saturday, July 8th copy. And now what I want to do is duplicate this layer by pressing Command J on the keyboard. And now I'll press V to get my Move tool, hold the Shift key, and then just drag upwards until it's overlapping the cute text here. Add a layer mask by coming down here to the bottom of the Layers panel and choosing the Add Layer Mask icon. And then I'm going to press B on the keyboard to get my brush tool. Now make sure that your brush is set to 100% by pressing 0 on the keyboard, and then you also want to make sure that you have black as your foreground color, which we do. So once you've made sure that you have those settings, I'm just going to come in here and paint some of this out. And then I'm going to select both of these layers and maybe just move them over a bit. Alright, but I also want to select the cute text layer here and make sure that everything is kind of centered visually. And the way that I'm selecting this layer without these other layers in between is just by holding the Command key. So I'm holding the Command key and clicking on the layers that I want to adjust. Okay, from here we can add a few more flourishes to this before wrapping up our text layout. And I'm going to grab Text Divider 82 and just open this up in Photoshop. And now we can bring this object into our document as well. So I'm just going to click and drag to bring this in, convert it to a smart object, and apply the same layer style settings. And then I'll just double click on the layer to rename it Text Divider 82. Now what we want to do is scale it down. So again, press Command T to apply a free transform, hold Alt, Option, and Shift to scale it down, and then move your cursor over one of the corners and hold the Shift key, and we're going to rotate it about 180 degrees. Now we just want to place it up top here, make it a little bit smaller, and make it look like it kind of follows the curve of our main container shape. Alright, and then we can just kind of place it roughly in the center here. Okay, so now what we can do is maybe space out some of our text a little bit more. So I'm going to select my take-home text, hold down the Command key, and click on the Vintage Logo Object 0162 layer, and then just tap it up a few times to add a little bit of breathing room between our text. Okay, and now I'll come back to my freebie folder, and now grab Text Divider 20, open that up in Photoshop, and bring it into our document. I'm going to move this to the top of the layer stack, hold down Ctrl and click on the layer to make it a smart object. And now I'll double click and rename this layer Text Divider 20. Apply the same layer style. And now reduce the scale or the size while holding the Alt, Option, and Shift key. And then we can place it down here in the center below all of our other text. So now I want to select a few of these layers here to center. So I'm going to select my text dividers. I'm going to leave the borders and the cute text alone for now, and I'll select everything else here except for those three layers, and then choose this option up top that says Align Horizontal Centers. Alright, now I can grab everything, just select those other three layers while holding the Command key, and I'm just going to tap them down a little bit. Okay, so we've now created our basic, information here inside of our container. So with all of these layers selected, press Command G to place them into a group folder, double click and rename the layer logo. What we can do now is bring in some of our nice pet illustrations from Lisa Glanz, who was kind enough to let us use these assets for the tutorial. And I'm going to open each of these up. First the cat, the short hair white cat, drag it into my document, and close out of these other tabs. Okay, and the quick shortcut just to close out of that is Command W. And now let's get our other two pets in here as well. So I'm going to open the French Bulldog, drag that into my document, close the tab, and then let's also bring in our large breed boxer. Okay, click and drag, so now you have all three of your pets in this file. So what we want to do next is rename each of these. Boxer Brown, French Bulldog Brown, and Short Hair White. And now I'll hold down the Control key and make each of these layers a smart object. Now with your top layer selected, hold Shift and then click on the third pet, which should be the cat, and press Command G to put them into a group folder. And let's just call this folder Pets. And now what we can do is, instead of applying a layer style to individual layers, we can actually apply it to this group folder and everything inside. So double click on the Pets layer, and now we can apply a drop shadow effect. So what I want to do for this is leave it set to black with the blending mode set to normal, and change the opacity to 38%. You can leave the angle to the same so that it matches our other objects that have a drop shadow applied, and then we'll change the distance to about 41 and leave the spread to 22 and the size to 0 and hit OK. Now I'm going to come back inside the Pets folder and just rearrange these a bit. So I'm going to move the cat on top of the other two layers. Now I'm going to select all three of these layers, and then I'll press Command T on the keyboard, and I'm just going to scale these down while holding Alt and Shift. Okay, so we can play around with the scale and the placement of these three pets. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see this a bit better. And I'm just going to move the cat slightly to the right so that it kind of overlaps the boxer. And then let's move the French Bulldog over to the left and down. So that it's kind of on this, imaginary plane here. And now you can move the entire group folder around if you like. But I think I'm going to tap this over to the left a little bit to center it, move it up. And now what we can do is select our logo group folder, hold Shift and select the container, and now I'll press V to get my move tool, zoom out, and hold the Shift key and just tap this up a few times so that we can give ourselves a little bit of space here between these elements. Because we want the pets to overlap, and it creates this cool effect with the shadow, but we don't want the dog to cover up any of the information. And now what we can do is open up our long borders. So I'm going to grab long border 11 and open this up in Photoshop. And I will do the same thing, just dragging this into our document, making it a smart object, and moving it on top. Now I'll just click inside here and rename this to long border 11. And I'm going to double click to bring up my layer styles and check off color overlay, and it will automatically be filled with that same off-white color. So go ahead and hit OK. Then press Command T on the keyboard to apply a free transform. Hold down the Shift and the Alt Option keys and drag inwards from any of the four corners here. And then I just want to place this so that there's room on both sides of the border. So I'm going to scale it all the way down so that it fits nicely in our flyer here. And then maybe just tap it down a couple of times. Now the next thing I want to do is create a copy of this to place on the bottom. So I'm going to press Command J on the keyboard, then press Command T, hold the Shift key, and drag this all the way to the bottom. Alright, with a little bit of space, you can eyeball it so it's about the same distance from the bottom as it is from the top. And now I'll select both of these layers while holding the Shift key, press Command G to put them into a folder, and I'm just going to call this Long Borders. Okay, so from here you can feel free to make any other adjustments, move things around, change the colors, pretty much do anything you want, but this is our final pet shop flyer design. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the outcome, and I look forward to seeing how you use some of these in your own work. So be sure to check out the full bundle. Thank you guys so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.